boys and girls, welcome to my channel. I'm for Classic and welcome to BenchART. So today I have in here another benchmark of the RX 6700 XT. This time around running the Monster Hunter Wilds, possibly the worst optimized game I ever seen until today. And I'm using the benchmark tool, not the original game or not even the full game. So I don't really know how this translates to the full game. Probably this game have a lot of players. They probably can tell if the benchmark tool is more or less what we can expect in performance compared to the game. But yeah, I will be using the benchmark tool just to have an idea of what's the performance that we will get. This benchmark tool, it is divided in three different stages. We have this first stage, which is essentially a cutscene that runs not very bad, to be honest. Then we have a second stage, which have what it seems like to be gameplay, but of course automated. And then at that gameplay moment, I have kind of traversing around one of the biomes. There is no fighting in there, just traversing, and then it ends up on a kind of a hub area, which is more demanding to the CPU, and then it just ends. And then there is a stage 3, which is again another cutscene in a closed environment with much less action, and that last cutscene, it is much less demanding than I was expecting. So the end results that we do get on this benchmark tool doesn't seem to make any sense. And let me just remind you that Monster Hunter Wilds, it is the game that in the system requirements do recommend to you for you to use frame generation. And in fact, as soon as I enter this benchmark tool, it kind of tries to suggest me to use frame generation to boost performance. So let me tell you something. I know that many people already recommend me to turn on frame generation. Let me just tell you that just my opinion in this, and my opinion is also shared by other media outlets out there that do agree with me. Frame generation was built in as a minimum of around 50 to 60 frames per second base frame rate. So it is used to boost performance to get you to something like 120, 144, and especially now with the recent NVIDIA graphic cards from the RTX 5000 series, you have kind of the frame generation to 3 times, 4 times. There is also a lossless scaling that does that. The objective of that frame generation is for you to have a base frame rate above than 60, and then kind of extrapolate that frame rate to I don't know, whatever the frame rate that you need to for your monitor to hit the refresh rate. So let's imagine that you have a 240 Hz screen. Probably you want the frame rate to be as close to that as possible. If you have kind of 120 Hz or 144, possibly you want to use frame generation 2 times or 3 times to be as close as possible as to that target frame rate, to be more close as possible as the hertz of the monitor. Now, I mean, what Monster Hunter Wilds it is trying to do, or it is trying to convince you to do, is to enable frame generation when playing at 30 frames per second. This is not the first time we have seen this. I have seen this on Yukong, yes, the monkey game, the Dark Souls monkey game, let's call it that way. That also does use frame generation even on consoles at 30 frames per second. That is just a normal proposition. I know that many YouTubers out there do use frame generation with frame rates under than 30, but honestly that is simply horrible. The input latency is just horrible. The other elements get entirely broken by using that. I tried that on Assassin's Creed Shadows, it was horrible. So it is really hard to recommend to use that, but this is PC gaming, so anyone can choose whatever they want. So if you want to use frame generation at 30 frames per second to make it happen to 60, that's really up to you. I honestly, I don't care. But since I'm not really a fan of that, I fully discourage disencourage. I don't know how to say that, but what I mean is I don't recommend you to use frame generation unless you have 60. So I don't care what Monster Hunter Wild says, I don't care what Wukong says, and I don't care what people says when they have a game running at 40 frames per second with frame generation, where their base frame rate is around 19. I seen stuff like that, so I fully disencourage that. Alright, so let's talk about performance. And this is with no frame generation. All these tests was with frame generation disabled. Alright, that's something that you should know. My recommended setting for you to play Monster Hunter Wilds on RX 6700 XT with the Ryzen 5 3600X running on PCI Express 3 instead of 4. Let me tell you that it is not possible to get a locked 60 frames per second. I believe it's mostly a CPU's issue in here. So for that same reason, my target it was to stay above than 30. And to stay above than 30, my recommendation is for you to simply play at 1080p high settings with no upscaling. So just use FXAA plus TAA and call it a day. Of course, there are these sequences, cutscenes that runs very well, although as you could saw during those gameplay moments, things weren't exactly and entirely like that. So the same way that I tried 1080p high settings, I also tried as usual many other settings. Just for you to have an idea, the low settings with FSR3 on quality mode is on the left. On the middle, 1080p median settings also with FSR3 in its quality mode. And on the right we have 1080p high settings also with FSR3 on its quality mode. So all these three settings are upscaling from 720p to 1080p using FSR, but we just have kind of low, median and high. Alright, and all I can see is that there is clearly some bottleneck in some occasions of the game, not in this vegetated area. But as soon as we start running out throughout the map, we can see that the GPU usage just drops, and frame rate it is very similar. So I believe this is the CPU fault in here. I believe that this is we are having a major bottleneck in here, in fact. But it seems like it's mostly when we are just running throughout the map. But still, the results in between 1080p low and median are very similar. It's really 1080p high that seems to be more GPU bound in some occasions, and it starts to have lower frame rate. But still, all these results of these three settings are very similar, mostly because the Ryzen 5 3600X it's not able to feed more frame rate than this. There are multiple reasons why this is happening. The first and more logical one is the optimization of the game. And the second one, and it's something that I already discussed in Spider-Man 2, is that this game makes use of direct storage. So direct storage, when it is set to be used as in the GPU, which is exactly why it was created. It was for the GPU to decompress textures. When it is being used by the GPU, it offloads a lot of CPU work, which means less CPU bottleneck. Unfortunately, on my build, I don't have any SSD, NVMe 2 or M2 I mean, NVMe or M2 I mean, which means that direct storage doesn't work. My SSDs are only SATA. They are not connected to the NVMe port or to PCI Express port. So what it means is that I can't use direct storage on the GPU, which means that the decompression of textures and stuff like that, it is done by the CPU, which makes the game more CPU demanding. Possibly if you have an SSD, NVMe, or something like that, probably you will have much less bottleneck than I have in here. Alright, now to finalize my 1080p testing, I also tried the game at 1080p ultra settings using FXAA plus TAA. So this is the highest preset you can go with, and it does run above than 30, alright, but you could saw that the 1% votes did drop in here to 28, 29. Like I said at the very beginning of the video, I have absolutely no idea how this game runs on the game itself. So if there are more moments more demanding than this one, which is probably going to happen, it also means that your frame rate will tank to something lower than 30 frames per second more often than not. So that's why I do recommend you to play with 1080p using TAA plus FXAA, and for some reason if your GPU starts to be an issue, just enable FSR3 on its quality mode and enjoy a huge boost in performance. So of course this is all in case that the GPU it is the limitation. So I'm repeating this sequence in here, this gameplay sequence, because like I also said, this gameplay sequence is more demanding aside from this desert area. In fact, it is more demanding than the cutscenes and also more interesting, and this should correspond much more with the gameplay that you have with the game than just watching cutscenes that could play at whatever the frame rate that you want. So yeah, this is 1080p ultra settings. Keep in mind that this is not the maximum settings. You can still enable ray tracing, I believe for reflections, I guess, and that also incurs in a bigger performance hits on both CPU and also GPU. And also don't forget about the increase in VRAM usage. That's another thing. If you use frame generation, VRAM usage also increases. So Monster Hunter Wilds already uses a lot of VRAM. So using frame generation, it will also increase much more the VRAM usage. So for some reason, if you have an 8 GB graphic card, using frame generation seems to be probably causing more issues than fixing most of them. So in here, and despite we are playing at ultra settings with native resolution, the Ryzen 5 3600X can't really handle this scene because GPU usage it is at around 90%. Back there, just like a couple of seconds ago, it was at 80%. So yeah, there is a huge bottleneck in here. Whatever if it is caused by the direct storage being set on the CPU, or whatever it is caused by a bad game optimization, I really don't know. So for 1440p, what I will be recommending it is high settings but using FSR3 in its quality mode. So essentially we are upscaling from 960p, something like that, to 1440p. So this provides an experience apparently above than 30 frames per second, as you can see. So yeah, it's running very fine. And as soon as we get to this desert area, we get frame rates more close to the 60 frames per second. So yeah, this is my recommendation for 1440p. It's just for you to use upscaling. And now let's take a look on other settings that I did run at 1440p. And so in here I just have again a lot of settings. So on the left, 1440p vol settings with FSR on its balanced mode. So in case you are wondering what is FSR 3 on its balanced mode, it is essentially 820p. Alright, and on the middle ground there is median with FSR 3 in its quality mode, which is as you know, it is pretty much 960p or something like that. And also on the right I have ultra settings with TAA plus FXAA. So regarding results, the low settings with FSR on its balanced mode, possibly you can get away with a variable refresh rate screen, but I'm not so sure about that. And the low settings, there is some huge downgrades in the visuals, especially stuff like ambient occlusion and stuff like that. It gets either removed or variable quality in that sense. And as for the median settings in here, I do think that it is also a good candidate for 30 frames per second lock, or a good 30 frames per second experience. I did recommend high with FSR3 in its quality mode, but if you find performance issues, the setting that I would recommend it was to drop the median and use FSR3 in its quality mode. And just for fun, on the right I have ultra settings, again with no ray tracing. I did not use ray tracing, I tried it and performance was pretty bad. These ultra settings, it's kind of curiously behaving very similar to 1080p Ultra, at least the 1% lows, so I I honestly don't know what to think about that. But yeah, if you are going to play at 1440p, either stick with median or with I with FSR3 in its quality mode. I think it makes sense, to be honest. So now let's jump out to the last resolution, which is 4K. So my recommended settings for 4K, it is median settings with FSR3 in its balanced mode. Keep in mind that just like some previous videos, my median setting upscaling for 4K it was balanced, but today I would probably still, instead of using FSR3 in its balance, I would probably go with FSR3 in its performance mode, because performance mode you are kind of upscaling from 1080p to 4K. I think it's rather good, and balance is something in between 1080p and 1440p. Alright, but I think that probably FSR3 in its performance mode it would be pretty cool, because balanced you kind of are playing above than 30, but some of the 1% votes got under than 30. So I'm not really sure if you are going to get any problems with that, and if you use FSR3 in its performance mode, you will get a nice boost in performance, and it will, the 1% votes will for sure be something above than 30 instead of being under than 30, which should grant better stability in having frame rates above than 30 frames per second. So yeah, despite my recommendation, it gets really to FSR3 balanced mode. Probably, in my opinion, I would drop it down to performance, but that's really up to you. And now let's move on to my last setting, which is essentially 4K mode settings with performance mode. I tried the eye settings with FSR3 in its quality mode, and yeah, obviously the frame rate was pretty bad. So that's why 4K I only have the median and the low. And for the low, with FSR3 in its performance mode, you can expect an experience above than 30, but low does look bad. There are some very... It's missing a lot of lighting stuff that makes the game more modern and more appealing. Yeah, calling more modern this game, it's kind of tough, because visually it doesn't look really like that, despite it does demand a lot. But yeah, I guess that's really, it is what it is. Alright. So I think that's all I want to talk about Monster Hunter Wilds. Hope you did enjoy this benchmark with the RX 6700 XT. And yeah, I think that's it. I think let me know in the comment section of the video what it is more demanding. If it is this benchmark, or just the game itself, or if it is really normal for those for the game to be more demanding or less demanding than the benchmark tool of the game. So again, I think that's all, guys. Thank you a lot for watching, and I do hope to see you soon in another video. So goodbye.